Christopher Nolan's Batpod wasn't just a Hollywood prop. It was a real, rideable motorcycle, so dangerous that Christian Bale himself was banned from riding it. From its secret origins during Batman Begins to the French stuntman who was the only person alive who could control it, the Batpod's creation involved stolen tires, Tesla sound effects, and a retractable cape that accidentally became iconic. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Dark Knight's Batpod. Fact 1. The Batpod was built in secret. During Batman Begins, before audiences ever saw the Batpod explode out of the wrecked tumbler in The Dark Knight, the iconic motorcycle was already being designed in secret during the production of Batman Begins. Production designer Nathan Crowley revealed that the entire project started when a Warner Brothers executive casually suggested during early development that the bike could emerge from the car as an escape pod. The idea stuck with Crowley and director Christopher Nolan, even though they knew they couldn't reveal it to anyone or include it in the first film. What makes this story particularly interesting is how they went about building the prototype without raising suspicion. Crowley and his team literally snuck onto the Warner Brothers lot and took the tires off the Batmobile, then brought them back to their garage workshop without telling anyone what they were doing or why they needed them. They couldn't explain their actions because the Batpod was supposed to be a surprise for the Dark Knight, so they just had to hope nobody noticed the missing tires and started asking questions. The secrecy extended throughout the entire design process during Batman Begins. Crowley described it as this covert operation where they had to sacrifice the Batmobile in the story so the Phoenix could rise from the ashes in the form of the bike. They worked on the concept knowing it wouldn't appear in the first film but would become a major reveal in the sequel. This meant spending months developing something that audiences wouldn't see for years, all while keeping it completely under wraps from the press, fans, and even much of the production crew. The whole secretive approach paid off when The Dark Knight hit theaters in 2008, and audiences got their first glimpse of Batman's incredible new ride emerging from the destroyed tumbler, with nobody having spoiled the surprise beforehand. Fact 2. Christian Bale was banned from riding it. You would think that playing Batman would come with some pretty cool perks, like getting to drive all those incredible vehicles. But when it came to the Batpod, Christian Bale found out that being the Dark Knight didn't mean he could actually ride the Dark Knight's motorcycle. Warner Brothers put their foot down and told Bale he absolutely could not ride the Batpod during filming, no matter how much he wanted to, because the bike was simply too dangerous and they needed their leading actor in one piece. In a 2012 interview with GQ magazine, Bale described the Batpod as essentially a steamroller combined with a superbike combined with an atomic missile, which gives you a pretty good idea of just how intimidating this machine really was. The studio wasn't being overly cautious either. The Batpod was genuinely one of the most difficult vehicles ever created for a film, with its massive tires, shoulder-based steering system, and the rider lying flat on their stomach while trying to control 730 pounds of custom motorcycle. Every single scene where you see Batman riding the Batpod in The Dark Knight was actually French stuntman Jean-Pierre Gouy, who spent months training just to be able to control the thing. Even for close-up shots where you might see Bale on the bike, he was actually being towed or dragged behind cars at 60 miles per hour rather than actually riding it himself. The production team considered the Batpod so risky that they built 6 of them expecting some would be destroyed in crashes. Bale's wife had also made him promise to scale back on motorcycle stunts after their daughter was born, which added another layer to the decision. But years later, Bale admitted he still regretted never getting to ride it, telling reporters, "You can't be Batman and not have been on the bloody Batbike." He called it embarrassing that he never got the chance, even though he understood why the studio made that call. The insurance costs and production delays if their Batman got injured would have been astronomical. Fact 3. Built from Home Depot parts in Nolan's garage. When Christopher Nolan and production designer Nathan Crowley decided they needed to create the Batpod for The Dark Knight, they took an approach that most Hollywood productions would never consider. Instead of spending weeks or months creating detailed scale models and computer renderings like they normally would, the two men decided to just skip all of that and build a full-size working prototype right away. Crowley later explained that when they were discussing how to bring the Batpod concept to life, they realized there was no real point in building a miniature model first. They figured they might as well go straight to Home Depot, pick up whatever parts and materials they could find, and start assembling the actual thing. So that's exactly what they did. Nolan and Crowley made a trip to their local Home Depot and loaded up on construction hardware, plumbing parts, and whatever else looked like it might work for building a futuristic motorcycle. They then took everything back to Nolan's personal garage, which had essentially become the unofficial design workshop for the entire Dark Knight trilogy. This garage space was where Nolan preferred to work out his early film designs, turning it into a makeshift art department where he and his collaborators could experiment freely. The two men spent their time in that garage, cutting, welding, and bolting together random hardware store components until they had created a rough but functional full-scale Batpod prototype. This hands-on, do-it-yourself approach was pretty unusual for a major Hollywood blockbuster, but it allowed Nolan and Crowley to immediately see what worked and what didn't work in 3 dimensions. Once they had their homemade prototype built from store-bought parts, they could hand it over to special effects supervisor Chris Corbould and his team, who would then engineer the actual filming versions. But the foundation of one of cinema's most iconic motorcycles literally started with a shopping trip to Home Depot and some creative tinkering in a residential garage. Fact 4: only one stuntman could ride it. When Christopher Nolan and his team finished building the Batpod, they quickly realized they had created a monster that almost nobody could actually ride. The bike's unusual design, with its massive tires, shoulder-based steering system, and prone riding position, made it incredibly difficult to control, even for experienced motorcycle stuntmen. Several professional riders tried and failed to master the unwieldy machine, leaving the production team worried they might not be able to film any of the planned action sequences. That's when they brought in Jean-Pierre Gouy, a legendary French stuntman who had already made a name for himself in the 1997 James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, where he famously jumped a motorcycle over a hovering helicopter. Gouy was considered one of the best motorcycle stuntmen in the world, and the Dark Knight producers hoped he could tame the Batpod where others had failed. When Gouy first saw the Batpod, even he was impressed by how enormous and intimidating it was. He had to ride the vehicle at 60 miles per hour while wearing a 100-pound Batman suit and dealing with cars coming straight at him at 60 miles per hour from the opposite direction. The Batpod could barely ride straight, and Gouy said he had to constantly adjust and turn it just to keep it moving forward. The producers initially planned to have him ride alone on an empty road and then digitally add the cars later using computer effects, but Gouy insisted on doing the stunt for real with actual vehicles driving toward him. He spent 6 months training and working on the stunts, all for just a few minutes of screen time in the final film. During the 2 months of filming in Chicago, Gouy rode nothing but the Batpod because it was so completely different from any motorcycle he had ever ridden before. Despite all the dangerous high-speed stunts he performed, Gouy only fell off the Batpod once during the entire production. Fact 5: powered by a Honda 750 engine. If you watched The Dark Knight and were amazed by the idea that the Batpod had engines mounted inside each of its massive wheels, you might be surprised to learn that this futuristic design was actually movie magic rather than mechanical reality. The actual Batpod that rolled through the streets of Chicago during filming was powered by a much more conventional Honda 750 cubic centimeters engine that was cleverly hidden under the vehicle's minimalist cowling and integrated into the frame. This wasn't a custom-built super engine or some exotic racing motor, but rather a reliable, high-performance Honda power plant that was geared toward the lower end for faster acceleration, which was exactly what the production team needed for the intense chase sequences. The engine setup on the real Batpod was actually quite ingenious in its own right, even if it wasn't as space-age as the film suggested. The exhaust system was routed through the hollow steel, aluminum, and magnesium tubing that formed the frame of the bike, which meant there were no visible exhaust pipes sticking out to ruin the sleek, futuristic appearance that production designer Nathan Crowley and director Christopher Nolan had envisioned. This integration of the exhaust into the frame was one of the many practical solutions that the special effects team had to engineer to make the Batpod both functional and visually striking on screen. The decision to maintain the wheel-mounted engine concept for the movie's story made perfect sense from a filmmaking perspective, since it reinforced the idea that the Batpod was an incredibly advanced piece of Wayne Enterprises technology rather than just a modified motorcycle. The filmmakers wanted audiences to believe this was something that could only exist in Bruce Wayne's world of unlimited resources and cutting-edge engineering, and the idea of independent wheel drive with motors inside each hub certainly sold that fantasy better than admitting it ran on a modified dirt bike engine. Fact 6 uses 31-inch sprint car racing tires. When you look at the Batpod, the first thing that grabs your attention is those absolutely massive tires that make it look less like a motorcycle and more like some kind of futuristic assault vehicle. Those aren't your standard motorcycle tires by any stretch of the imagination. They're 31-inch Hoosier racing tires that were originally designed for a completely different purpose. These specific tires were created for United States sprint car racing, which is a type of dirt track racing where small, lightweight cars with enormous engines compete on oval tracks. And the tires need to be incredibly wide and durable to handle the extreme forces and rough surfaces. Sprint cars are known for having disproportionately large tires compared to the size of the vehicle, and the Batpod borrowed this exact same design philosophy. The production team chose these particular Hoosier tires because they needed something that would not only look intimidating and unique, but also be able to support the weight and design of the Batpod while still being functional enough to ride. The tires are so wide that they dwarf virtually any tire you would find on a standard motorcycle, and they create that distinctive, aggressive stance that makes the Batpod instantly recognizable. In fact, both the front and rear tires on the Batpod are identical to the front wheels used on the Tumbler Batmobile, which makes sense since the Batpod is designed to eject from the Tumbler when it's damaged. The sheer width of these tires also created one of the biggest engineering challenges for the special effects team, because steering a motorcycle with tires this wide is nothing like steering a normal bike. Special effects supervisor Chris Corbould mentioned that his main concern when he first saw the Batpod design was figuring out how to make the steering work, since a regular motorcycle turns on about a square inch of rubber contact with the road. But the Batpod had these 20-inch wide tires that completely changed the physics of how the vehicle would handle. Fact 7. Steered with shoulders, not hands. If you've ever ridden a motorcycle, you know that steering happens through the handlebars, where you use your hands to control direction. But the Batpod threw that entire concept out the window with one of the strangest steering systems ever designed for a two-wheeled vehicle. Instead of traditional handlebars, the Batpod is steered primarily by shifting your shoulders, while your forearms fit behind protective shields that act as controls. This unconventional setup made the bike incredibly difficult to control, even for experienced motorcycle riders. The way it works is that the rider's arms slide into these shield-like sleeves on either side of the front wheel, and inside those shields are individual handles that the rider grabs. But the actual steering doesn't come from turning those handles like you would on a normal bike. Instead, the rider has to use their entire upper body, leaning and shifting their shoulders to make the massive 20-inch wide tires change direction. It's more like controlling the bike through body weight distribution than through any kind of hand steering, which goes against every instinct that motorcycle riders develop over years of experience. This design choice wasn't just for looks. Production designer Nathan Crowley and director Christopher Nolan wanted the Batpod to feel completely different from any motorcycle anyone had ever seen, and the shoulder steering system definitely achieved that goal. Special effects supervisor Chris Corbould later explained that when he first saw the design, he immediately recognized the steering would be a major problem because of how wide the tires were. On a standard motorcycle, you're turning on about a square inch of rubber making contact with the road, but on the Batpod, you had those massive 20-inch wide tires that needed to be controlled. The difficulty of this steering system is exactly why only one person, stuntman Jean-Pierre Goy, was capable of riding the Batpod during filming. Multiple other experienced stunt riders tried and failed to master the shoulder steering technique. Even Christian Bale, who performed many of his own stunts throughout the trilogy, was deemed incapable of safely controlling the bike and was never allowed to ride it. Fact 8. Weighs 730 pounds and needs no kickstand. Most motorcycles need some kind of support to stay upright when they're parked, whether that's a center stand or a side kickstand that flips down to keep the bike from tipping over. But the Batpod from The Dark Knight doesn't follow the normal rules of motorcycle design, and one of its strangest features is that it's completely self-righting, which means it can balance itself without any kind of stand at all. The Batpod weighs in at 730 pounds, which is significantly heavier than most standard motorcycles. And this massive weight plays a key role in how it stays upright on its own. The way the weight is distributed across the bike's unique frame, combined with those enormously wide 31-inch tires and the low center of gravity created by the prone riding position, allows the Batpod to naturally balance itself when it's stationary. It's essentially designed so that when the bike is at rest, it settles into a stable position without needing any additional support. This self-righting feature wasn't just a cool design choice for the sake of looking futuristic in the movie. It was actually a practical necessity because of how the Batpod was built and how it needed to function during filming, with the rider lying flat on their stomach and the unusual steering system controlled by shoulder movements instead of handlebars. Adding a traditional kickstand would have created complications for both the design and the stunts. The bike needed to be able to stop, start, and maneuver quickly during action sequences without the rider having to worry about deploying or retracting a stand. The production team confirmed that every single element on the Batpod served a specific functional purpose, and nothing existed purely for aesthetics. This self-balancing capability meant that stuntman Jean-Pierre Goy could focus entirely on controlling the bike's difficult steering and handling without the added concern of keeping it upright when stopped, which was crucial given how challenging the Batpod already was to ride under normal circumstances. Fact 9. Engine sound based on Tesla Roadster. When you hear the Batpod roaring through the streets of Gotham in The Dark Knight, that distinctive engine sound that seems to keep climbing higher and higher in pitch isn't actually coming from a motorcycle at all. Sound editor Richard King, who won an Academy Award for his work on the film, used recordings of a Tesla Roadster's electric motor to create the Batpod's unforgettable audio signature. Christopher Nolan had a specific vision for how Batman's bike should sound, and it involved an audio illusion called a shepherd tone, which is a sound that appears to continuously rise in pitch without ever actually getting higher. King explained that Nolan wanted the Batpod to sound like it was always accelerating, creating an unstoppable force that would add tension to the chase scenes, and the shepherd tone was the perfect way to achieve this effect. To make the shepherd tone work properly, King needed to start with fairly pure sounds, which led him to electric motors instead of traditional combustion engines. He recorded several big electric motors and even put electric race cars on a dynamometer, which is a machine that lets you record extreme acceleration and engine torque in a controlled environment without the car actually moving anywhere. The Tesla Roadster and a Wrightspeed X1 prototype were among the vehicles he used. But King didn't stop there. He also experimented with tire sounds, knowing that the Batpod's huge, wide tires would be an important part of the overall audio experience. He recorded different kinds of tires, including off-road truck tires and knobby all-terrain vehicle tires. In a particularly unusual moment of inspiration, King was running on his treadmill at home when he dragged his running shoe over the back of the moving tread and thought the sound was perfect. He recorded it on his small Sony recorder, and that sound ended up being integrated with the other tire recordings to create the final Batpod tire sound that audiences heard in theaters. Fact 10. The flapping cape was an accident. When the filmmakers first started designing the Batpod for The Dark Knight, they had a serious problem on their minds that seemed like it could ruin the whole concept. Batman's flowing cape, which is such an iconic part of his look, appeared to be a major safety hazard when combined with a high-speed motorcycle. The concern was simple but dangerous. What if the cape got caught in the Batpod's rear wheel while Batman was racing through Gotham at top speed? That kind of accident could be catastrophic, both for the stunt rider and for the expensive vehicle they had spent months building. Special effects supervisor Chris Corbould was especially worried about this issue, and he came up with what seemed like a smart solution. He asked the costume design team if they could create a special backpack system that would automatically retract Batman's cape, sucking it up and out of the way when the Dark Knight climbed onto the Batpod. The costume designer Lindy Hemming and her crew actually went ahead and developed a working prototype of this retractable cape backpack, complete with drawings and a functioning mechanism. It was an impressive piece of engineering that would have solved the problem completely. But before they committed to using this expensive and complicated backpack system in the actual film, Corbould suggested they should do a practical test first to see if the cape really was as dangerous as everyone feared. They put stunt rider Jean-Pierre Goy on the Batpod prototype, wearing the full Batman costume, including the cape, but with one important modification. They attached the cape using very easily breakable ties, almost like tearaway connectors, so that if anything did go wrong and the cape started getting pulled into the wheel, it would simply snap off rather than dragging the rider backward or causing a crash. Then Goy fired up the Batpod and took off, and something unexpected happened. As soon as he started moving, the wind caught underneath the cape and lifted it up and away from the bike. Instead of drooping down toward the dangerous rear wheel, the cape billowed out dramatically behind him, flowing and rippling in the wind like a dark banner. Not only did it stay completely clear of the wheel without any help from a retractable mechanism, it also looked absolutely incredible. The thing that Corbould had been most worried about turned out to create one of the most visually striking and iconic images of the entire film. The cape flowing behind Batman as he raced through the streets on the Batpod became a key part of what made that vehicle look so memorable and cool on screen, and it happened completely by accident. Fact 11. Anne Hathaway couldn't ride it either. When Anne Hathaway signed on to play Catwoman in The Dark Knight Rises, she trained extensively to perform as many of her own stunts as possible, pushing herself to handle the physical demands of the role. But when it came time to ride the Batpod, the production team made the same decision they had made with Christian Bale years earlier. She was forbidden from actually operating the dangerous motorcycle. Just like Batman himself, Catwoman would need a stunt double to handle the intimidating machine. The challenge was finding a female stunt rider who could master the Batpod's unique and difficult controls, because director Christopher Nolan was determined to follow industry guidelines that require stunt doubles to match the gender and physical characteristics of the actors they're doubling for. This wasn't just about following rules. Nolan and his team couldn't imagine having a man try to mimic Hathaway's graceful, seductive performance as Catwoman. The problem was that the Batpod had already proven nearly impossible for even experienced male motorcycle stunt riders to control, and now they needed to find a woman who could do what most men couldn't. Enter Jolene Van Vogt, a former Nitro Circus star who had never auditioned for a Hollywood job before in her life. Van Vogt was given an incredibly tight deadline, just 3 days to master the Batpod, or the job would go to Jean-Pierre Goy, the French stuntman who had been Batman's double. The pressure was immense, but by the end of the first day, Van Vogt was already racing Goy around the track and performing figure eights. Nolan himself praised her abilities, calling her a supremely talented rider who picked up the Batpod like a natural. For 4 months that fall, Van Vogt wore Catwoman's tight lycra suit, complete with elbow pads, a helmet, and a brunette wig, bringing the silver Batpod to life on screen while Hathaway performed the close-up and dialogue scenes. Fact 12. 6 were built expecting crashes. When the production team started building the Batpod for The Dark Knight, they knew they were creating something that had never been done before, and with that came a very real risk of things going wrong. The Batpod wasn't just a prop that would sit pretty on a soundstage, it was a fully functional motorcycle that would be driven at high speeds through the streets of Chicago, performing dangerous stunts that would push both the machine and its rider to their limits. Because of this, special effects supervisor Chris Corbould and his team made the decision to build not just one Batpod, but 6 identical copies of the vehicle. The reasoning was simple. They expected some of them to be destroyed during filming, whether through crashes, mechanical failures, or just the wear and tear of putting the bike through its paces day after day. Building 6 Batpods was no small undertaking, considering each one required a custom-made chassis, fiberglass body panels, those massive 31-inch Hoosier racing tires, and a Honda 750 engine tucked inside the frame. Every single Batpod had to be identical so that they could be used interchangeably during filming without the audience noticing any differences. The production couldn't afford to have just one bike, because if something happened to it during a crucial stunt, the entire filming schedule would grind to a halt. So they prepared for the worst and hoped for the best. What's remarkable is that despite all these precautions and the extreme difficulty of riding the Batpod, French stuntman Jean-Pierre Gouy, the only person who could actually control the thing, only fell off once during the entire production. This is especially impressive when you consider that Gouy was riding at speeds up to 60 miles per hour, often with cars driving toward him at the same speed, all while wearing a 100-pound Batman costume and steering with his shoulders instead of handlebars. The fact that only one crash occurred speaks volumes about Gouy's skill and the careful planning that went into every stunt, even though the production team had wisely prepared for multiple disasters that thankfully never happened. Fact 13. The sideways tire skid was pure CG. One of the most jaw-dropping moments in The Dark Knight happens when Batman rides the Batpod through tight corners and narrow alleys, with the massive tires appearing to swivel sideways on their axles while the bike slides through turns without losing control. The visual effect makes it look like the wheels are spinning perpendicular to the direction of travel, creating an almost impossible physics-defying maneuver that had audiences wondering how such a machine could actually work. But here's the truth that might disappoint some fans. Those sideways tire rotations were created entirely with computer-generated imagery, and the real Batpod couldn't perform this move at all. The visual effects team at Double Negative was responsible for adding these digital enhancements to make the Batpod look even more advanced and otherworldly than it already was. In reality, the actual physical Batpod that stuntman Jean-Pierre Gouy rode during filming operated like a conventional motorcycle in terms of its tire movement, just with significantly wider rubber and shoulder-based steering. The production team knew that showing the tires rotating on multiple axes would add to the futuristic, almost alien quality of the vehicle, making it seem like Batman was riding something that defied normal engineering principles. The decision to add this CGI effect was part of Christopher Nolan's overall vision for the Batpod, even though he famously preferred practical effects whenever possible. The filmmakers wanted audiences to believe this bike could do things no normal motorcycle could accomplish, and the sideways tire spin became one of the signature visual elements that made the Batpod feel like genuine cutting-edge technology rather than just a modified motorcycle. Some eagle-eyed fans and motorcycle enthusiasts even pointed out that if the guns mounted on the front wheel actually touched the ground during these sideways skids, the bike would lose all traction and spin out of control, which further confirms the move was pure movie magic rather than practical stunt work. Fact 14. Rider lies face down with feet, 3.5 feet apart. If you've ever wondered why the Batpod looks so different from any motorcycle you've seen on the street, the riding position is a huge part of what makes it so unusual and frankly uncomfortable. The rider doesn't sit upright like on a normal bike. Instead, they lie almost completely flat on their stomach, stretched out along the tank in a prone position that looks more like riding a torpedo than a motorcycle. This belly-down stance was intentional in the design because it helps protect Batman as he rides into dangerous situations, making him a much smaller and harder target to hit compared to sitting upright where he'd be fully exposed. But the really weird part comes down to where the rider's feet go. Instead of having normal foot pegs close together like you'd find on any standard motorcycle, the Batpod has the foot pegs positioned 3.5 feet apart from each other, one on each side of the massive tank. These aren't even regular foot pegs either. They're more like stirrups that the rider has to slot their feet into, almost like you're doing the splits while lying face down on a speeding vehicle. This extremely wide leg position was necessary because of the Batpod's unconventional design with those gigantic 20-inch wide tires and the way the whole frame is built. But it also means that controlling the bike requires incredible core strength and flexibility. Jean-Pierre Goy, the only stuntman who could actually ride the thing, had to maintain this uncomfortable, stretched-out position while steering with his shoulders and dealing with a 700-pound machine traveling at high speeds. The combination of lying prone, keeping your legs spread that far apart, and trying to control a vehicle that has no normal handlebars makes the Batpod one of the most physically demanding movie vehicles ever created. And it's a big reason why so few people were even capable of riding it during filming. Fact 15. One sold for over $400,000 at auction. If you ever wondered what it would cost to own a genuine piece of Batman history, one lucky collector found out in 2016 when they paid £312,000, which converted to over $406,000 for an actual Batpod used in filming The Dark Knight Rises. This wasn't just any replica or promotional model either. This was what film crews call a hero vehicle, meaning it was specifically built for close-up shots where every detail had to be perfect for the camera. The bike featured all the intricate design work, the functioning laser targeting system, and the custom paint job that appeared on screen. Though, like all the auctioned Batpods, the fluids had been drained, the battery removed, and the throttle controls disconnected, so it was sold as a non-functional rolling display piece rather than something you could actually ride down the street. What makes this sale even more remarkable is that the pre-auction estimate valued the Batpod at somewhere between $80,000 and $110,000, which means the final hammer price was roughly 4 times higher than what experts predicted anyone would pay. The auction took place at the Prop Store Live Auction in the United Kingdom on September 27, 2016, and the Batpod came with a Warner Brothers certificate of authenticity to prove its legitimacy. The bike showed visible signs of its hard work on set, including wear on the body panels, light corrosion on the chassis, and damage to the left gun mount from actual filming use. But these battle scars only seemed to increase its value to collectors who wanted a genuine artifact rather than a pristine showpiece. Since that 2016 sale, at least one other Batpod has come up for auction with an estimated value between $1 million and $2 million, showing that these iconic vehicles have only become more valuable as the Dark Knight trilogy's legacy has grown over time.